solitary state. But boy, this life was meant for brothers.
That's Noam Tomaschoff singing a new song from his musical called Our Little Secret, the 23andMe musical. He named the show after the DNA testing company at the center of a long-held family secret about his own birth. For 30 years, the Toronto actor and producer thought he was an only child raised by a Jewish family. His father is an Israeli-Canadian engineer and artist, and his mom, a doctor, actually an obstetrician and gynecologist, originally from Montreal. Tomaschoff attended a Jewish high school, Toronto's Tannenbaum Chat. He speaks Hebrew, he's visited Israel, and he's had a successful career making movies in L.A. But his whole life changed last summer. The reason? The 23andMe test he wanted to take just for fun while on holidays at the family cottage. But before he could even tear open the kit, his parents realized they'd better come clean about the truth of his ancestry before he found out for himself, which would be worse. So they told him how when they were young, they had fertility problems and they used an anonymous sperm donor in the United States, a non-Jewish donor. It was a wrenching conversation for everyone in the family, and it took time for all of them to process what it meant for their relationship. Eventually, Tomaschoff discovered he now has 35 half-siblings scattered around the world. There's a Facebook group. He's traveled to meet some of them. And now he's turned the whole story into a musical, which is debuting July 6th at the Toronto Fringe Festival.
I felt very alien to myself. And I realized what a basic foundational piece of our identities is if we know who our parents are, that's something that sort of that's like a line of code that runs in the background of your brain when you wake up in the morning that allows everything else to happen. But then you take part of that away, and it's quite a surreal feeling of looking at your hands or looking in the mirror and being like, what is that? Who is this?
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, June the 27th, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily. It's a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Did you read the book by Dani Shapiro, the American author who, when she was in her 50s, discovered her Orthodox Jewish father was not her biological father? Well, she wrote a best-selling book about it called Inheritance. And Noam Tomaschoff is doing something similar after the shock of learning his dad, Gideon, wasn't his biological father. But keeping the secret all these years has also been hard for Gideon because it meant confronting his own deep sadness as a young man when he couldn't have children. And for Noam's mother, Sylvie, who had converted to Judaism when she met Gideon, it was equally difficult because she had wanted to tell Noam the truth for years. Noam Tomaschoff and his parents join me now from Toronto.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to meet you guys. What an incredible story. I'm so excited to hear more. Before we get into the specific play, I guess you guys need to introduce yourselves and why we're here. Noam, just a couple of words about your background.
I went to Chat. I went to Bialik before that. And in high school, me and my good friends, we were obsessed with musicals. This is Ryan Peters, Russell Citron, Jeremy Chad, Ben Deverett. And we actually wrote a musical together at the end of high school. And we got covered in the CJN back in, 2009, which was amazing. And then I went on to theater school in New York, and I went on to be an actor. And then I did a film that came out last year and have been living in Los Angeles.
Okay, so we'll turn on to Gideon.
I was born in Israel to a family of Holocaust survivors. In 1980, I met Sylvie in Europe. A few years later, we settled in Israel. Then we lived in the States, where Noam was born in 1991. And we then moved to Canada. So Sylvie and I have been living in Canada since 1992.
Well, I'm from Montreal, and I went to Marinopolis Cégep, where I'm French, Canadian, Italian, but I befriended someone who's still my best friend, who was Jewish, and I became very familiar with the Jewish community in Montreal. And in fact, we traveled I then went to medical school. But after first year med school, that in those days, everybody went to Europe on the Ural Pass, and she came with me. And just on the last leg of that trip, on the boat between Greece and Italy, is where I met Gideon. The rest is history.
Okay, wow. So Noam, I interrupted you. We were talking about how this project came to be and how you discovered about your family's secret.
Yeah, well, I had just come off that big 3-year creative project, and I was working on some other jobs, which were great to have, but also kind of like weren't exactly sparking a ton of like creative fire. And I was sort of looking for something to pique my interest. And I was chatting with this girl who's now my girlfriend. She mentioned 23andMe, the DNA test, a company that, and a thing that I had known about. I mean, it's pretty common, but I had never thought to actually do it because it was always so obvious to me what the results would be, because we've always been so connected to the family. And like a couple of years ago, we went on like a roots trip to Austria and Slovakia and saw like where the Tomaschoffs come from, and a graveyard with like hundreds of graves with our name on it. Like it was just, I didn't think I would get anything new from this test. So I never actually ordered it. But at that time, I was just like more inclined to just fishing around for something. And I Googled it and it was on sale. And the fact that it was on sale, I was like, you know what? Fine, that's great. I'll finally order it and I'll do it, and it'll be interesting. And so I did that. And then later that day, I told my mom that I did that in passing. And it was odd to me that she was like weird about it. She was like, "What? Why do you want?" Weird. You were like, "Why do you want to do that?" And I said, "What? Who cares? Like, it's just interesting. I really just didn't think it would, and it should be just like a neutral thing."
Well, we were on a hike, all right, on an island, and I was a little bit behind Noam, and he basically launched this little grenade at me, and I was like, knew the ramifications, and I was trying to be super casual, and I said, "Oh, really? Do you think those are accurate? Like, why do you need to do that?" Meantime, my brain is going a million miles an hour thinking, oh my God, we got to tell him. And I knew that Gideon's reaction would be very emotional, and I was just trying to somehow handle this whole situation. Yeah. So basically, like he said, I let the day elapse as well, the whole time thinking, okay, we got to do this. And again, I knew nobody, if I told Gideon that at that point, nobody would sleep that night. So I elected to wait till first thing in the morning.
And I was like, the attitude was so odd to me that they're like, "We need to tell you something." I was like, "Oh."
So you thought they were getting divorced? Is that what they were telling you, right?
The top two were someone died or I was in trouble. So I sat down at the table, and it was very tense and dramatic. And then, like, you all motioned for us all to hold hands. I was like, we've never done this. What is this? Like, I have no idea. I'm very much on the edge of my seat. Like, and then he was the one who said it.
Well, I just looked at Noam and told him I'm not his biological dad. That when Sylvie and I got married 40 years ago, back in Israel, we tried to conceive, have a baby. We had problems, and after some investigations, it turned out that it was me. A couple of years later, we moved to the U.S., to Connecticut, and there Sylvie did her residency. I worked as a young engineer, and then we were thinking about adoption, but it turned out we couldn't adopt because none of us was an American citizen, and if you're not American, you cannot adopt. We're living in the States, so this was the only option for us. And Sylvie was conceived by artificial insemination by anonymous donor, but for all practical purposes, I was dad. We were told to keep it as a secret.
You get a catalog. And it was very Spartan, basically height, weight, things like that, eye color, hair color.
What's his ethnic background, religion, marital status, does he have kids,
Profession.
special skills, and interests.
You told him all this stuff that day at the at the cottage table. And how did that go over, Noam? Was that a huge shock?
Yes, I was completely shocked and sort of stupefied. And I was like sort of laughing. I was like, no way. Like, come on. Really? How can this be? I never suspected such a thing. And it was, in fact, like, I thought I was the least likely person for this to be true about. Because, like, my parent, like, he's so obviously my dad. Like, I speak Hebrew, like, in a fluent way because we always spoke Hebrew. Like,
And sorry, by the way, this whole conversation was in Hebrew.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my first questions was like, was this donor Jewish? And they were like, no. And I thought that was pretty surprising. Like, my dad's so intense about, like, you know, being part of the community. I was like, well, you accept like a non-Jewish donor?
Well, there's a halachic reason why it's actually better. And I don't know if you guys know this, or you probably do. So maybe you can tell us.
No,
The rabbis approve of AIH, it's called, right? And you're the expert, so you help me. But they also approve of donor if the sperm donor is not Jewish, because it's not about wasting seed. They're okay with that. It's about, God forbid, later on in the next generation, you meet somebody who's a descendant of this donor that did a bunch of people, and then you have an incestuous, non-knowing incestuous relationship.
Fascinating.
So it's supposed to marry Jewish.
Yeah, well,
So you hear this, you're like, no, it can't be. Then how did your identity get impacted by this? It's a lot to take in.
it's a lot to take in, but yeah. So the initial phase is quite shocking, and basically, it's like if you've eaten food your whole life, like pizza, and then today somebody tells you that stuff isn't cheese. You're like, what have I been eating? It was pretty crazy. And so, you know, it took us several weeks to just incorporate this understanding, this new fact into my like understanding of reality. And also to contend with the fact that it's at once a piece of trivia that doesn't change anything materially about life, but also one of the most fundamental facts about you as a person. And that initial phase of, you know, sort of dealing with the shock was also the time that I was waiting for the results of the 23andMe test.
Yeah, and this month he was in LA, we were in Toronto. There wasn't that much communication. We knew he was not happy. You know, he was down. We were down, and then one day we received a call from him, and already from the tone of his voice, I knew something happened. I knew he seemed excited. He seemed uplifted. He seemed the different Noam, you know, than in the past month.
Yeah. I mean, I got the results of the 23andMe back, and I opened mine, and the ancestry section was 60 or so % Irish. So that's clearly from the dad. I mean, I've always been like a big Anglophile. And of course, Ireland is Ireland, but just like, you know, English-Irish music, culture, sports, Shakespeare, theater, comedy, like that's been my thing. Is that because of this? Who knows? But it's just fun. And then there was the 30% Italian from my mom. So that all made sense. So it sort of ethnically, I'm this like consummate Catholic, Irish, Italian. 0% Jewish at all. You know, there was maybe like 1% of like Southern European broadly and unknown, but like no Jewish at all, which was crazy to think about. But pretty quickly I was very comfortable with the understanding that like culture and community is taught. Like, okay, it's how you're raised. Like you're not born, you know, in your DNA with a sort of community. Like that happens. So it wasn't really this crazy, existential crisis regarding like the Jewish side of things. And other people certainly go through this, but to me, it was pretty easy to divide between the two. And then, of course, the next phase was going to the friends and family tab. This is where you see your DNA relatives. This is how we find out more. This is how we find out if we know who this dad is or if there are others like me. And it said you have 15 close relatives, which means they were half siblings. So there was a list, names, some of them had pictures. And so I looked through the list and I found one who was recently active. She was like on the platform, so I thought she would answer me. And I messaged her and I said, hello, just found out we have the same biological father. This is all very new to me, but you're the first one I'm messaging. Like, let me know how it's all been. And then she answered me pretty quickly and she said, hello, Noam, welcome to the tribe. There are at least 35 of us that we know of. Do we know who the dad is? And she said, yes, you look like him. I was like, wow. This was before I'd seen a picture. And then pretty quickly, she invited me into the group, and that's where all the information was. They all probably found each other around 2018, 19. But yeah, there's this whole group that exists, and they had actually had a meetup in March. So like they all met up in Chicago. I think a lot of them are pretty musical, and I am too. And then, of course, there was the information about the dad. And he was really not your average donor. Your average donor is like a med student who does it while they're in school. This guy was a grown-up adult man with like a crazy career already. And that's when he donated.
And a family.
So I was going to say, he was a family man. He was a father of biological kids.
In fact, one of his children was in this Facebook group. And Noam later met him and gathered a lot of information about him from his son.
And his kid, my half-brother, is 60.
I'm 60. I'm going to be 67. This guy is 19 years older than me.
How do you understand your parents' choice to not tell you until last year?
Yeah, I understand it. That's why I wasn't so mad. Like, I was appropriately peeved initially, just for the simple fact that there was this like secret for so long. But I couldn't think of an age where I wish I had known sooner. I think 31 is a great age to find out. Because you're old enough to deal with it properly, but not too old that it's too crazy to process and to change your life.
Right, because imagine your mother is an OBGYN and she can't have kids. That must have been so hard for you.
It was very difficult. I mean, it started off in Israel, which, as you know, everybody has, I mean, it's the trend, the norm to get married, have kids, and have a lot of kids. And, you know, when you've been married a couple of years, people are not shy there. They're like, what's going on? Why are you no children yet? What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. That was one of the reasons we left, basically. It was very hard to deal with, yeah.
And also, I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. My father had two brothers. One was killed in the war in Israel, and one, committed suicide because of what we believe is heritage of trauma from World War II. And my father was one, I don't know if you know, the Kinder Transport.
Of course, your father was on the Kinder Transport?
My father was on the Kinder with his two brothers. They're originally from Czechoslovakia, where they spent the war years in England. Overall, it was a good experience. It saved their life for sure. And then they moved to Israel, and the parents actually survived, managed to get out of Europe just in the nick of time. But for 6 years, the parents were in Israel or Palestine then, and the kids were in England. And so, I had one sister. I have one sister, and I felt, not being able to have children would be an extreme blow to my father, my mother, and so I didn't really tell them. And for years we didn't tell them that we had a problem. And we moved to the States. It's only when Sylvie got pregnant that we told them the truth. They knew, and everybody was extremely happy that Noam was coming. They came to the States for the Brit. Sylvie's parents came from Montreal. It was a very happy moment. And pretty soon we settled in Toronto with Noam, and Noam began his Canadian chapter.
Have you decided to go counseling, or did you need counseling?
The creative process, because to me it seemed like what I was given was a number and an increasing number of huge new things to put in my head. And the chaos that might come from that would be if I had never taken the time to organize them and fit them into like the narrative of my life. So fitting them into the narrative of a musical was a huge part of the process of making it make sense. Like, if I didn't do anything like that, it still would have been quite like paralyzing to have all of this stuff in my head, but unorganized. So I didn't see an alternative to writing a musical.
Well, that's how great artists created.
So the answer is no, we have not had therapy.
No.
I want to end off by asking for advice from each of you, now that you've been through this. So Noam, I'll start with you. What advice do you have for people in the process or considering doing this?
Well, everyone's experience is different. And I've spoken to half siblings who, I know of people in my group even who like don't want to know more and sort of don't want to hear about it, don't want to be in touch with people. In my case, I've always felt that more information is always better, because the fewer secrets that exist within a family dynamic is better. The toll that it takes to keep a secret from people that you're meant to be close with is immeasurable.
Thinking about some group of men who find themselves in my situation at a younger age, when you're trying to bear children and you find that you can't. It's a pretty lonely existence. It's really hard to talk to anybody about it. We were so lucky with Noam. If this experience, if you're asking me to give advice, I'd say go for it, I mean, just do it. And then I say it out loud, if I could meet that man and thank him, I'd go and, kiss his hand, because he basically saved our life.
So I have to say I was a proponent to telling him at a young age. I had read some information about, kids accept what you tell them. You tell them something, okay, they grow up with it. But Gidon wouldn't hear of it, and I had to compromise in some way. I think in the end, it should be kept open. It's very tough. Like, when do you tell them? How do you tell them? It's very tough. It causes a lot of stress and strife, I can say. And as for the 23andMe test, listen, you're opening a Pandora's box, and I think it's coming to light.
I think a lot of people who be hearing your words, all of you, would admire you for telling this story now, because so many families are in similar situations, infertility or other circumstances. And maybe today there's less of a shanda, and I'm going to use that word, but that's, what it was in those days. Something one didn't talk about. It was embarrassing to the community. So I think people would be saying that you're brave to say this now. I don't know. How do you feel about seeing your story being told? Like, what did you have to do to get ready to sort of tell it? Because it's not an easy thing, even so many years later.
We went through 180 degrees, everything that happened until the moment that Noam said that he was writing a play, that he will mount the play in Toronto in the Fringe Festival in the summer of 23. Everything until that moment was private, still private. And then once he made this announcement, we realized that he's outing us, basically. We have to start telling our friends, a close circle of friends, and then a wider circle of friends. And of course, anybody in the family who didn't know. We actually went back in April, 2 months ago, we flew 3 of us to Israel to tell Noam's first cousins. So, the first people we told was difficult. And then the next couple of friends, it was a little bit easier. And then on and on and on. And by now we probably told all our friends and asked them to tell their friends, and to make it known, so.
And when we told Noam, as he said, of course he was shocked, but he was so gracious. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. Who cares? Like whatever. And yes, and then when he told us this little bombshell about this play in Toronto, we realized that, and actually what I want to say is his main request was, that's it, no more secrets. There'll be no more secrets. And we felt, okay, well, this is our comeuppance, like we just have to respect that and start to, it's very difficult. Some people are less difficult than others, but, and of course the first ones were so awkward, but everybody without fail is like, wow, great story. Doesn't change anything. Let's move on, and people have been very accepting. And you're right, in this age of two moms and two dads, and so it's so much more acceptable. But it was certainly, we felt that, it was a very closely guarded secret for so many years.
And now I want to say Noam is reciprocating by keeping the show itself. We haven't seen it. Noam is keeping it a secret from us. He's keeping his cards very close. We'll see the first performance on July 6th. We can't wait. And
bring Kleenex.
We think it's a great way for him and us to deal with this. This is a great vehicle. This writing the play, it's a great idea.
It's therapeutic for everybody in what you're saying.
Totally.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to Jody Bells Pasternak. And we'll end with a quick note that I'm out on an exciting reporting assignment on Tuesday, so we won't have a show on Wednesday. We'll be back Thursday, as usual, right here on the CJN Daily. By the way, if you missed the video of the problems at the Zionist building at 788 Marley Avenue in Toronto, the video's now up on our CJN YouTube channel. It's a must-see. Thanks for listening.